Hello, welcome back to another video. Please consider giving us a like. Let's get started. Sherlock Holmes and the Adventure of the Stolen Manuscript. Chapter 1. A Call to Intrigue. The morning was one of those rare occasions in London when the sun, like a shy performer, peeked timidly through the usual curtain of fog. It was November, and though the air was crisp, it carried the unmistakable bite of winter. I had settled into my armchair at 221 B Baker Street with the latest issue of the British Medical Journal. The world outside hummed faintly, the clip-clop of hooves on cobblestone streets providing a rhythmic backdrop to my reading. It was a morning I had hoped would remain uneventful, a brief respite from the whirlwind of mysteries that seemed to follow Sherlock Holmes. But as I should have expected, peace was not destined to linger long in our quarters. The door to our sitting room opened with a suddenness that startled me, and Holmes swept in like a gust of wind, his long coat billowing behind him. In his hand he held a crumpled piece of paper, and his eyes, sharp and bright as ever, betrayed a keen excitement. "Watson!" he exclaimed, his voice brimming with energy. "We are summoned!" I set my journal aside and regarded him with a mix of curiosity and resignation. Summoned Holmes? By whom, and for what purpose? He handed me the paper, which proved to be a hastily written telegram. I read it aloud. To Mr. Sherlock Holmes, 221, B Baker Street, London. Urgent assistance required. Manuscript of immense historical importance stolen from locked study. No signs of forced entry. Please come at once. Professor Ephraim Cartwright, Hampstead. Professor Cartwright? I said, lowering the telegram. The historian? The author of the Chronicles of Albion? Holmes nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. The very same, a man whose intellect is matched only by his reclusive nature. For him to reach out to me suggests a matter of great consequence. "And what exactly has been stolen?" I asked. "A manuscript, Watson, an unpublished work, no doubt filled with revelations that would reshape our understanding of Tudor England." I frowned. "Surely Scotland Yard is capable of handling such a matter." Holmes waved the suggestion away with an impatient flick of his hand. "Hardly. The manuscript was taken from a locked study with no evidence of forced entry. A locked room mystery, my dear Watson. There is no higher challenge for the mind." His eyes gleamed as he spoke, and I could not help but feel a twinge of excitement myself. Locked-room mysteries were indeed Holmes's forte, and I had witnessed his brilliance unravel seemingly impossible puzzles on more than one occasion. "Well," I said, rising from my chair, "it seems I have little choice but to accompany you." "Excellent!" Holmes exclaimed. "I should be lost without my Boswell, but, Watson," he added, his tone softening, "this is more than mere companionship. Your observations, your steady hand, they are as vital to my work as my own deductions. I have often said, friendship is not a question of give and take, it is a matter of belief in one another, and I believe in you, Watson." Such praise from Holmes was rare, and it warmed me to hear it. I nodded, resolving to do my utmost to justify his faith. "Let us be off, then. The Professor awaits." The journey to Hampstead was brisk and uneventful. The streets of London, bustling as ever, gave way to the quieter, leafier environs of the northern suburb. Hampstead, with its stately Georgian houses and sweeping views of the city, seemed a world apart from the chaos of the capital. As we approached Professor Cartwright's residence, a grand manor flanked by ancient oaks, I could not help but marvel at the air of scholarly gravitas that surrounded the place. The door was answered by a manservant who ushered us into a cavernous entry hall. Moments later, Professor Cartwright appeared. He was a wiry man of middle age, with sharp features and a nervous energy that seemed at odds with his scholarly reputation. His dark eyes darted between Holmes and me, and his thin fingers wrung together incessantly. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said, his voice tinged with both relief and anxiety. "Thank you for coming so quickly. Please, follow me to the study." He led us down a corridor lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors and into a room that could only belong to a historian. Shelves crammed with books lined the walls, and the large oak desk at the centre of the room was littered with papers, ink bottles, and quills. It was a place of profound intellectual activity, yet its current air was one of disarray and unease. Holmes immediately began to survey the room, his keen eyes darting from one corner to the next. "You said the manuscript was stolen from here, Professor?" "Yes," Cartwright replied, gesturing to the desk. "It was here last night when I locked the study. This morning, when I unlocked the door, it was gone." "The door was locked, you say?" Holmes approached the heavy oak door and examined the keyhole. "And the windows?" "Latched from the inside," Cartwright replied. "I checked them myself." Holmes crossed to the window and inspected the latch with his magnifying glass. "No sign of tampering," he murmured. "Interesting." As Holmes continued his examination of the room, the rug, the desk, the shelves, I took the opportunity to observe the professor himself. He seemed genuinely distressed, but there was something about his manner that struck me as odd. His fingers drummed nervously on a side table, and his gaze, though it followed Holmes, often strayed toward the fireplace. "Did you notice anything else unusual?" I asked Cartwright. "Any sounds in the night? Any strangers near the house?" He shook his head. "No, nothing." "It's as though the manuscript vanished into thin air." Holmes straightened and turned to face us. "A locked room, no forced entry, no signs of disturbance, yet the manuscript is gone. A curious puzzle indeed." He looked at Cartwright. "I shall need time to consider the facts, but rest assured, Professor, the truth will reveal itself." With that we departed, leaving the professor to his fretting and the study to its secrets. As we stepped back into the cool air of Hampstead, I could not help but ask, "What do you make of it, Holmes?" "It is, as I said, curious," he replied. "The absence of any obvious clue makes the case all the more intriguing." "And the professor?" I pressed. "What do you make of him?" Holmes smiled faintly. "Ah, Watson, the human element is always the most complex piece of the puzzle, but we must not leap to conclusions. The mind, like a blade, is most effective when it is sharp and disciplined." He paused and looked at me with that rare intensity of his. "And that, my dear Watson, is why your companionship is indispensable. You remind me, time and again, that observation is not just about seeing, but about understanding." As we boarded the carriage back to Baker Street, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was no ordinary case, and though Holmes had his doubts, I vowed to be as invaluable to him as he had always been to me. Chapter 2. The Scholar's Sanctuary. The journey to Hampstead had left us in quiet anticipation, with Holmes absorbed in thought and I silently marvelling at the vast expanse of the city that unfurled beneath the rising November sun. Upon reaching Professor Cartwright's estate, the sheer grandeur of the Georgian manor struck me as befitting a man of his intellectual stature. The manor stood amid towering oaks, its weathered stone facade exuding an air of timelessness. We were greeted by a manservant whose sombre expression mirrored the gravity of our purpose. Without ceremony, he led us through a cavernous entry hall adorned with tapestries and portraits that seemed to watch us as we passed. Professor Ephraim Cartwright awaited us in his study, a room that could only belong to a man of scholarship. Shelves of books stretched to the high ceiling, and papers covered every surface. It was a sanctuary of knowledge, now tainted by the spectre of theft. Cartwright himself appeared more harried than scholarly. His wiry frame seemed coiled with nervous energy, his deep-set eyes darting between Holmes and me as though assessing whether we were up to the task. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice strained, "thank you for coming so promptly. The theft of the manuscript is not merely a personal tragedy, it is a blow to historical scholarship." Holmes inclined his head. "Your telegram conveyed the urgency of the matter. Please, tell us everything." Cartwright gestured to the desk at the centre of the room, its surface conspicuously bare, save for a few scattered papers. "The manuscript was here last night when I worked late into the evening. I locked the study before retiring, as I always do. This morning, when I unlocked it, the manuscript was gone." Holmes's grey eyes sharpened. "Locked, you say? And the key?" "I keep it with me at all times," Cartwright replied, producing a heavy brass key from his pocket. "There is no duplicate?" "Interesting." Holmes turned his attention to the room itself. Let us begin. Holmes's methodical approach to investigation never failed to captivate me. He moved through the study like a predator stalking its prey, his eyes taking in every detail. He began with the door, examining the lock and hinges with his magnifying glass. "No scratches or marks to suggest tampering," he murmured. "The lock appears intact." He moved to the windows, each of which was secured by a brass latch. After inspecting the frames and sills, he nodded to himself. No forced entry here either. The windows were latched from within. Meanwhile, I found myself observing Cartwright. He stood by the side table, his fingers drumming nervously against the wood. His gaze shifted from Holmes to the fireplace, lingering there longer than seemed necessary. His unease was palpable, and though I could not yet determine its source, I filed the observation away for future consideration. Holmes next turned his attention to the desk. He examined the scattered papers, lifting each one with a delicate touch, as though it might hold the answer he sought. Among the documents he found a single playing card, a black ace of spades. "Curious," he remarked, holding it up for us to see. "Professor, was this card among your possessions?" Cartwright frowned. "Number, I've never seen it before." Holmes's lips tightened. "A calling card, perhaps, or a message." He slipped the card into his pocket and continued his search. He scrutinized the rug for disturbances in the pile, the bookshelves for gaps or misplaced volumes, and even the faint scuff marks on the floorboards near the desk. After nearly an hour, Holmes straightened and turned to Cartwright. "The manuscript was taken, yet the room shows no signs of intrusion. An unusual problem indeed." "What do you make of it, Mr. Holmes?" Cartwright asked, his voice tinged with desperation. Holmes hesitated. "A rare occurrence. I require more time to draw conclusions. However, the locked room aspect suggests either a feat of extraordinary cunning or something altogether more mundane, concealed beneath the surface." Cartwright's shoulders sagged slightly. "I trust you will uncover the truth." As we prepared to leave, I lingered by the fireplace, unable to shake the feeling that it held some significance. The grate was empty, save for a faint layer of ash that seemed fresher than one might expect in an unused hearth. I made a mental note to revisit the observation later. Outside, the crisp air of Hampstead felt like a reprieve after the stifling tension of the study. As we stepped into the carriage, I could not help but ask Holmes, "What do you make of the Professor?" Holmes leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "A man of intellect and secrets, Watson. His nervous energy betrays more than the loss of a manuscript. Whether it is guilt, fear, or some other emotion, I cannot yet say." "You suspect him?" I ventured. Holmes shrugged. "I suspect everyone until proven otherwise. That is the nature of my work. As I have often said, Eliminate all other factors, and the one which remains must be the truth. His confidence was reassuring, yet I could not shake my own unease. And the card? The ace of spades? A detail that does not yet fit, Holmes admitted. But remember, Watson, it is a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. The card's purpose will reveal itself in time. The journey back to Baker Street was a silent one, each of us lost in our thoughts. I considered the peculiarities of the case, the locked door, the unbroken windows, the professor's restless demeanour. Holmes, for all his brilliance, seemed to be grappling with the lack of a thread to pull. When we arrived home, he immediately settled into his armchair with his pipe, the faint curl of smoke rising as he stared into the middle distance. "It is an enigma, Watson," he finally said, "a locked room without a keyhole for the mind to probe." I nodded, though my thoughts were elsewhere. The professor's anxious glances toward the fireplace lingered in my mind. Was it merely a coincidence, or had Cartwright's nervousness betrayed a deeper truth? I resolved to keep my suspicions to myself for now. After all, Holmes's process was methodical, and he often found clarity where others saw only confusion. Yet as I retired for the evening, I could not help but feel that this case would test us both, not only Holmes's powers of deduction, but my own ability to contribute meaningfully to the work. Little did I know that the answers would come from the very observations Holmes had not yet considered. Chapter 3. The Enigma of the Ace. The morning after our visit to Professor Cartwright's estate, I awoke to find Holmes already immersed in his contemplations. He sat in his chair by the window, pipe in hand, the faint scent of tobacco hanging in the air. His violin lay abandoned on the side table, a silent testament to a restless night. The ace of spades, retrieved from Cartwright's study, rested on the arm of his chair, its stark black design seemingly taunting him. "Good morning, Watson," he said without turning. "I trust you slept better than I." "Well enough," I replied, taking my seat opposite him. "But the case weighs on my mind. Have you made any progress?" Holmes gestured to the card. "This enigmatic ace, Watson, is both a clue and a challenge. It is not merely a card, it is a symbol. But of what? A calling card, perhaps? A signature left by the thief? Or something more obscure?" He leaned forward, his sharp eyes fixed on me. "What do you make of it?" I considered the question carefully. If it were a signature, it suggests the thief wanted to leave a mark, perhaps out of arrogance or as a statement. But if it holds some deeper meaning, it might point to their identity or motive. Holmes smiled faintly. "An excellent deduction, my friend. Yet the card's placement among Cartwright's papers raises another possibility. It could have been planted to mislead." He rose abruptly, pacing the room with the ace of spades between his fingers. "This case, Watson, is a locked-room puzzle in every sense. No sign of forced entry, no discernible motive, and this confounded card as our sole tangible clue. It is maddening." By mid-morning, Holmes's frustration had reached a palpable pitch. He donned his overcoat with a dramatic flourish. "We must retrace our steps. Cartwright may have concealed more than he realized, or intended. Come, Watson, let us revisit Hampstead." The carriage ride was marked by Holmes's characteristic silence, his mind clearly racing through the possibilities. I, too, found myself replaying the events of the previous day, my thoughts lingering on the professor's nervous behavior. His constant glances toward the fireplace seemed to hold a significance that Holmes, in his pursuit of physical evidence, had overlooked. When we arrived at the estate, Cartwright greeted us with evident surprise. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, back so soon?" "Indeed," Holmes replied briskly. "I find it prudent to revisit a scene when the initial evidence proves insufficient." Cartwright hesitated, then stepped aside to let us in. "I see," Well, you are welcome to examine the study again, though I assure you nothing has changed. Once inside the study, Holmes began his meticulous inspection anew. He moved from the desk to the bookshelves, then to the window latches, his magnifying glass in constant motion. Meanwhile, I found my attention once again drawn to the fireplace. The grate was empty, but the faint layer of ash within seemed fresher than one might expect from a disused hearth. "Watson," Holmes called, breaking my concentration. "Do you notice anything unusual about the alignment of these papers?" I joined him at the desk, where he gestured to the scattered documents. "They are arranged haphazardly," I observed. "But that seems natural for a busy scholar." "Precisely," Holmes said. Yet the playing card was tucked beneath them, as though deliberately concealed. It suggests the thief, or whoever left it, had time to carefully place it. That would mean they were not acting in haste, I noted. Curious? Curious indeed. Holmes turned back to the desk, but my mind returned to the fireplace. Cartwright's glances toward it had not been idle, of that I was certain. Yet why would the hearth draw his attention in a case of theft? As Holmes continued his search, I engaged Cartwright in conversation. "Professor, I cannot help but notice that you seem unsettled. Are you quite certain you've told us everything?" Cartwright stiffened slightly. "I have, Dr. Watson. The theft of the manuscript is a grievous matter, and I have shared all I know." "You seemed particularly distracted yesterday," I pressed gently. "Might there be something else weighing on your mind?" He hesitated, his fingers once again drumming on the side table. "I am merely concerned for the safety of my work. That manuscript is irreplaceable." Holmes, overhearing, turned sharply. "Irreplaceable indeed. Yet, Professor, your behavior suggests you fear more than the loss of knowledge. What are you hiding?" Cartwright flushed but said nothing. Holmes regarded him for a long moment before sighing and turning back to his investigation. "Your silence, Professor, only adds to the mystery." The return to Baker Street was subdued, both of us lost in thought. Holmes, I knew, was turning over every detail in his mind, searching for the elusive thread that would unravel the mystery. I, however, found my thoughts increasingly drawn to the Professor himself. His behavior, the ashes in the fireplace, the careful concealment of the playing card, all pointed to a truth not yet articulated. As we arrived home, Holmes retreated to his chair, the ace of spades once again in hand. "It is, as you said, curious," he muttered, "but curiosity alone will not solve this case." "No," I agreed, "but perhaps the answers lie in the very details that seem least important." Holmes looked up at me, his expression one of rare admiration. "Ah, Watson, it is moments like these that remind me of your true value. Together, my friend, we shall find the truth, even if it remains elusive for now." With that he returned to his contemplations, the playing card spinning idly between his fingers. Little did either of us know that the key to the mystery was already within our grasp, and that it would be I, rather than Holmes, who would uncover it. Chapter 4. Whispers of Unease. The return to Baker Street brought a shift in Holmes's demeanour. The dynamic detective, usually brimming with confidence and determination, seemed uncharacteristically subdued. He spent much of the evening pacing the room, his thoughts clearly racing in pursuit of the elusive solution to the enigma posed by Professor Cartwright's study. The ace of spades lay on the mantelpiece, a quiet reminder of the unanswered questions still looming. As Holmes wrestled with the problem, my own thoughts gravitated back to the peculiar behavior of Cartwright himself. His restless demeanor and persistent glances toward the fireplace struck me as more than mere anxiety over the missing manuscript. There was something in his actions that suggested a hidden layer of meaning, though I could not yet articulate what it might be. The following morning I found Holmes poring over his books, the ace of spades in hand. His sharp features bore the marks of a restless night, but his grey eyes were as piercing as ever. "Watson," he began, "this card, it nags at me. Its presence in Cartwright's study is deliberate, yet its meaning remains maddeningly obscure." "You believe it to be a message?" I asked. "Undoubtedly," he replied. "But is it a signature, a taunt, or a distraction? That is the question. Symbols are rarely without purpose, and this one, with its association to misfortune and cunning, speaks to an intent beyond mere theft." He leaned back in his chair, the card spinning idly between his fingers. "Tell me, Watson, what is your impression of Professor Cartwright?" I hesitated before answering. He struck me as deeply anxious, which is understandable given the circumstances. But his behavior seemed to betray something more, a secret perhaps, or a fear he has not disclosed. Holmes nodded thoughtfully. An astute observation. I, too, found his manner peculiar. He is a man burdened by more than the loss of a manuscript. I leaned forward. "And what of the fireplace, Holmes?" He seemed preoccupied with it, though it was never mentioned as part of the theft. Holmes's brows furrowed. "An intriguing detail, Watson. One worth exploring further." By midday, Holmes decided it was time to seek further insight. "We shall pay a visit to an old friend of mine," he announced, "a man with a penchant for symbolism and an unrivaled knowledge of the arcane." This friend, a certain Mr. Elias Ventnor, resided in a small, cluttered flat in Clerkenwell. Ventnor, an eccentric scholar with a shock of white hair and a perpetually ink-stained waistcoat, greeted us with evident enthusiasm. "Holmes and Dr. Watson, I presume," Ventnor exclaimed, shaking my hand warmly. "What brings you to my humble abode?" Holmes produced the ace of spades. "We seek your expertise, Ventnor. This card was found at the scene of a peculiar theft. What can you tell us about its significance?" Ventnor examined the card with great care, his brow furrowing as he turned it over. "Ah, the ace of spades. A potent symbol indeed. In some circles it represents misfortune or death, a harbinger of ill fate. In others it is a mark of cunning and mastery, often used by those who wish to convey a sense of superiority." He handed the card back to Holmes. "But its meaning depends greatly on the context in which it was left. Do you know who might have placed it?" Holmes shook his head. "Not yet. But your insights are invaluable, as always." Ventnor smiled. "Then I wish you luck, my friend. May the truth reveal itself." As we departed, I could sense that Holmes remained dissatisfied. The card's symbolic weight was clear, but its connection to the theft of the manuscript remained elusive. "Ventnor's analysis confirms what we suspected," Holmes said as we walked. "The card is no random trinket. It was placed with intent, but by whom and for what purpose? That is the riddle." I nodded, though my thoughts drifted once again to Cartwright. His nervous energy, his preoccupation with the fireplace, and his hesitance to share more about the manuscript all painted a picture of a man with something to hide. I resolved to press Holmes on this point. "Holmes," I began, "have you considered the possibility that Cartwright himself may be withholding vital information?" Holmes stopped in his tracks, turning to face me. "I have, Watson, but while his behavior is undeniably suspicious, we must tread carefully. The mind, like a scalpel, must cut precisely, or it risks damaging what it seeks to understand." I smiled faintly. "Ever the cautious surgeon, Holmes?" He returned the smile, though his expression remained contemplative. "Nevertheless, your instincts are often sharper than you realize, Watson. Let us revisit the good professor tomorrow. There are questions yet to be answered." The following day we returned to Hampstead under a slate-grey sky. Professor Cartwright greeted us with a mixture of surprise and apprehension. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said, ushering us into the study. "Have you made any progress?" "Progress, yes," Holmes replied. "Conclusions, not yet. But there are matters that require further clarification." As Holmes engaged the professor in a series of pointed questions about the manuscript's contents and its significance, I found my attention once again drawn to the fireplace. The ash within seemed untouched since our last visit, yet its presence nagged at me. Taking a calculated risk, I knelt before the hearth and began to examine the grate. The faint layer of ash suggested recent use, but there were no logs or kindling present. "Dr. Watson," Cartwright said, his voice tight, "what are you doing?" I looked up, meeting his gaze. "The fireplace, Professor. It seems to hold your attention, though you have not mentioned it in connection with the theft. Is there something here that we should know?" Cartwright's face paled, and his fingers began their habitual drumming on the side table. I don't see how the fireplace is relevant." "Perhaps it isn't," I replied evenly. "But the truth often hides in the places we least expect." Holmes, observing the exchange, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The professor's unease spoke volumes, and for the first time I felt certain that the solution to this mystery lay not in the clues we had gathered, but in the secrets that Cartwright himself had yet to reveal. Chapter 5. The Labyrinth of Clues. The atmosphere in Baker Street was heavy with silence, save for the occasional crackle of the fire in the hearth. Holmes sat cross-legged on the sofa, his steely grey eyes fixed on the ceiling, lost in thought. The ace of spades lay on the table before him, untouched, as though it were a talisman he dared not disturb. For hours I had watched him remain in this pensive state, his pipe long since extinguished, his violin resting unused beside him. Finally I broke the quiet. "Holmes, this case seems to vex you more than most." He lowered his gaze to meet mine, his expression unreadable. "It does, Watson, not for lack of clues, but for their maddening refusal to coalesce into a clear pattern. The locked room, the manuscript, the card, all point in different directions." "It seems to me," I ventured, "that the professor himself is the most perplexing piece of this puzzle. His unease suggests he knows more than he is willing to share." Holmes nodded slowly. "An astute observation, my dear fellow. Professor Cartwright's demeanour has troubled me from the start. He is a man burdened by a secret, though whether it pertains to the theft or something altogether separate, I cannot yet determine." At that moment, Mrs. Hudson entered with a telegram. Holmes snatched it up eagerly, his eyes scanning the message with lightning speed. His lips curved into the faintest of smiles as he handed it to me. "Watson, it seems fortune smiles upon us. A pawnbroker in Lambeth has reported receiving a manuscript matching Cartwright's description. Come, my dear fellow, the game is afoot." The streets of Lambeth were a far cry from the leafy avenues of Hampstead. Here, soot-streaked buildings crowded together under a grey sky, and the air carried the mingled scents of coal smoke and damp stone. The pawnbroker's shop was a narrow, dimly lit establishment crammed with a chaotic assortment of goods, from tarnished silverware to battered violins. The proprietor, a stout man with a ruddy complexion, greeted us with a wary nod. "Mr. Holmes, I presume. I sent the telegram." Holmes inclined his head. "You did well. Now let us see this manuscript." The man led us to a glass case at the back of the shop, where a bundle of yellowed papers lay beneath a velvet cloth. Holmes examined the pages with his magnifying glass, his movements precise and deliberate. "It is indeed the professor's manuscript," he murmured. "But how did it come to be here?" The pawnbroker shrugged. "A man brought it in 2 days ago, seemed in a hurry to sell it. but I thought it looked valuable, so I made him sign the register." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "The register, let me see it." The man produced a ledger, which Holmes scanned quickly. He tapped a finger on the page. "Ah, here we are. The seller gave his name as Edward Blake. A common enough name, but this address in Whitechapel might prove useful." As we left the shop, Holmes's energy seemed renewed. "Watson, we now have a tangible lead. This Edward Blake, if that is indeed his real name, must know how the manuscript came to be in his possession. We shall call on him at once." Our journey to Whitechapel took us into the heart of London's grittiest quarter, where narrow alleyways teemed with life. The address led us to a dilapidated lodging house, its facade streaked with grime. Holmes rapped sharply on the door, which was answered by a thin, shifty-eyed man who introduced himself as the landlord. "Edward Blake?" Holmes inquired. The man hesitated. "He's upstairs, but he's not well. Been laid up with a fever these past few days." "May we see him?" Holmes asked, producing a coin that quickly loosened the landlord's reluctance. The room we entered was sparse and stifling, the air heavy with the sickly scent of sweat and mildew. Edward Blake lay on a narrow cot, his face pale and beaded with perspiration. He blinked at us weakly as Holmes approached. "Mr. Blake," Holmes began, his voice gentle but firm, "we mean you no harm. I am Sherlock Holmes, and this is Dr. Watson. We are here to ask about the manuscript you sold to the pawnbroker in Lambeth." Blake's eyes flickered with recognition and fear. I didn't steal it," he rasped. "I swear." Holmes sat beside him, his gaze piercing. "Then tell us how it came into your possession." Blake swallowed hard, his voice trembling. "A man gave it to me, said he needed money fast, and offered it as collateral. I didn't ask questions, just took it to the pawnbroker the next day." "What did this man look like?" Holmes pressed. Blake hesitated, then described a figure of medium height with dark hair and a heavy coat. "So he had a scar on his left cheek," he added. Holmes nodded, rising to his feet. "You have been most helpful, Mr. Blake. Rest now, and may your fever break soon." As we left the lodging house, Holmes's expression was grim. "A shadowy figure with a scar, a description as vague as it is ominous. Yet it is a thread, Watson, and every thread, no matter how slight, leads to the fabric of truth." Back at Baker Street, Holmes settled into his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "The labyrinth grows, Watson, but we are no longer blind within it. The pawnbroker, Blake, and the scarred man, they form the edges of a pattern. Tomorrow we shall see if Cartwright himself is willing to complete it." Though Holmes seemed invigorated, I could not shake the sense that the mystery was far from resolved. The labyrinth of clues was vast, and the truth lay hidden in its depths, waiting for us to uncover it. Chapter 6. Shadows in the Hearth. The morning broke with a pale sun filtering through the London mist, a fleeting brightness that seemed at odds with the deepening mystery. Holmes, as usual, was an early riser, already engaged in silent contemplation when I entered the sitting-room. The ace of spades was no longer on the table, but had been carefully pinned to the corkboard where Holmes often arranged his clues. "Watson," he said, without looking up, "we are nearing the heart of this puzzle. The threads are beginning to converge, though one knot remains stubbornly untied." "And what is that knot?" I asked, taking my seat by the fire. "Cartwright," Holmes replied, his voice sharp. "His secrets are the final veil over the truth. Today we shall lift that veil." We arrived at Professor Cartwright's manor just past 10. The house, so grand on the outside, now seemed to bear the weight of its occupants' unease. The professor met us in the study, his usual nervous energy more pronounced than ever. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said, wringing his hands. "Have you any news of my manuscript?" We do, Holmes replied, his voice calm but firm. It has surfaced in Lambeth, though how it came to be there is a question you must help us answer. Cartwright paled visibly. I have told you everything I know. Have you? Holmes's tone was sharper now, his eyes narrowing. Professor, your behaviour has been illuminating. You are a man burdened by fear, but whether that fear stems from the theft or something else I cannot yet say. Cartwright faltered, his gaze darting toward the fireplace. It was the briefest of glances, but Holmes caught it. Ah, Holmes said, a glint of triumph in his eyes. The fireplace, you have been hiding something there, haven't you? The professor took a step back, his face ashen. I don't know what you mean. Come now, Professor, Holmes said, striding to the hearth. The ash in the grate suggests recent use, yet you claim the fireplace has been untouched. Shall we see what lies within? Without waiting for permission, Holmes retrieved the poker and stirred the ashes. I joined him, my curiosity piqued. Beneath the thin layer of soot lay fragments of charred paper, their edges curled and blackened, but still faintly legible. Holmes extracted the largest piece with care, examining it closely. Watson, do you recognize this handwriting? I leaned in. Though scorched, the elegant script was unmistakably Cartwright's. It's his. Holmes turned to the professor, his expression severe. Professor Cartwright, you have burned pages of your own manuscript. Why? The man sank into a chair, his composure crumbling. I was afraid, he admitted, his voice trembling. The manuscript contains sensitive information, truths that could destroy reputations, ruin lives. When I realized its implications, I panicked. I thought if I removed the most damning sections, it might make the theft less consequential. And yet, Holmes said, his tone laced with disappointment, your attempt at concealment only deepened the mystery. You burned pages, but not all of them. Why? Cartwright hesitated before answering. I couldn't bring myself to destroy it entirely. The manuscript is my life's work. Holmes sighed, setting the charred fragment aside. Your actions have muddied the waters, Professor, but they also suggest that the thief knew of the manuscript's significance. Who else might have been aware of its contents? Cartwright shook his head. No one outside my household and my publisher. Your household, Holmes repeated, his eyes narrowing. Tell me, has any servant recently left your employ? The professor looked startled. Yes, as a matter of fact, a maid, Clara. She left quite suddenly a week ago. Holmes's lips curled into a thin smile. And did Clara have access to the study? She cleaned it regularly, Cartwright admitted. But she wouldn't. She might, Holmes interrupted. Where did she go? I believe she returned to her family in Clerkenwell, Cartwright said, his voice faltering. Holmes rose abruptly. And that is where we shall go. Watson, come. Clerkenwell, with its narrow streets and bustling markets, felt worlds away from the quiet opulence of Hampstead. It did not take long to locate Clara's residence, a modest tenement tucked between a bakery and a cobbler's shop. Her mother, a kindly but wary woman, greeted us at the door. Clara is resting, she said. She's been unwell since leaving her position. Holmes nodded. I regret disturbing her, but I must speak with her about a matter of great importance. Please assure her that no harm will come of it. After a moment's hesitation, the woman relented and led us inside. Clara, a pale, thin girl of no more than 20, sat in a small parlour, her hands folded nervously in her lap. She looked up as we entered, her eyes wide with apprehension. Clara, Holmes began, his voice gentle but firm, I am investigating the theft of Professor Cartwright's manuscript. I believe you may have information that can help. Her face turned ghostly white. I don't know anything about a theft." "Clara," I interjected, sensing her distress, "we're not here to accuse you. But if you saw or heard anything unusual during your time at the manor, now is the time to tell us." Tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't steal it," she whispered, "but I saw someone." Holmes leaned forward. "Who?" She hesitated before answering. "A man, a stranger. He came late one night while the professor was asleep. I heard him in the study, but I was too afraid to confront him." "What did he look like?" Holmes pressed. "He was tall, with dark hair, and a scar on his cheek." Holmes exchanged a glance with me. "The scarred man?" he murmured. "Thank you, Clara. You've been most helpful." As we stepped back into the street, Holmes's expression was one of grim determination. "The net tightens, Watson. The scarred man has resurfaced, and with Clara's testimony, we have a new lead." "But who is he?" I asked. "That," Holmes said, is the question we shall soon answer. Chapter 7. The Professor's Paradox. The revelation from Clara had breathed new life into our investigation. The mention of the scarred man tied together several threads: Edward Blake's description, the sudden appearance of the manuscript in Lambeth, and now an eyewitness account placing him in Cartwright's study. Yet the deeper mystery of the professor's actions and the burned pages still lingered, casting a shadow over the case. Holmes spent much of the evening pacing our sitting room, his hands clasped behind his back, his brow furrowed in thought. I knew better than to interrupt him when he was in this state, so I busied myself with my notes, trying to piece together the fragments of the case. Finally, Holmes spoke. "Watson, do you recall what Cartwright said about the contents of his manuscript?" "Yes," I replied. "He claimed it contained sensitive information, truths that could ruin reputations." Holmes nodded. "Precisely. It is not merely a historical document. It is a weapon, a means to influence or destroy those it implicates. Such a manuscript would not only attract thieves, but also manipulators." "And you believe the scarred man is one such individual?" "Undoubtedly," Holmes said, his voice cold and sharp. "He's no common thief. His actions suggest he has a specific goal, and that goal is tied to the manuscript's secrets." The next morning, Holmes instructed me to accompany him to Hampstead once more. This time, however, he carried with him a sealed envelope. "Cartwright must be confronted," he said as we climbed into the cab. "There is more to his story than he has revealed, and I intend to uncover it." When we arrived, the professor greeted us with the same nervous energy we had come to expect. His face, however, seemed paler than before, his eyes sunken with exhaustion. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said, his voice trembling, "have you made any progress?" "We have," Holmes replied, holding up the envelope. "Inside this is the name of the man who took your manuscript. But before I reveal it, I must ask you one final question. Why did you burn part of your work?" Cartwright stiffened, his hands clenching the arms of his chair. I told you it was too dangerous." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Dangerous to whom? To the reputations of others? Or to yourself?" The professor's face crumpled, and he buried his head in his hands. "To both," he admitted. "The manuscript contains details about a scandal in the Tudor court, but it also includes commentary that I foolishly added. My opinions, my speculations. If those were made public, they would discredit not only the work, but my entire career." "And who else knew of these details?" Holmes pressed. "No one outside my publisher and my household," Cartwright replied. "I swear it." Holmes leaned back in his chair, his gaze piercing. "Professor, I must tell you something that will shock you. The man who stole your manuscript was not a stranger to you. He was an ally, or at least someone you once trusted. Cartwright looked up, his expression one of disbelief. "What are you saying?" Holmes opened the envelope and removed a slip of paper, which he handed to Cartwright. The professor read it, his hands trembling. "Edward Blake," he whispered. "But that's impossible. I've never heard of him." Holmes shook his head. "Blake is merely an alias. The man in question is your former publisher's assistant, Henry Morley." "Morley?" Cartwright gasped. "But why would he do such a thing?" Holmes stood, his presence towering over the seated professor. "Because he knew the value of your manuscript, both monetary and political. He likely overheard details of its contents during his time with your publisher and decided to exploit them. The scarred man is one of his accomplices, hired to carry out the theft." Cartwright's face turned ashen. "What can we do? The manuscript must be recovered." "It has already been found," Holmes said, his voice measured. "Though damaged, it is intact enough to be returned to you. However, there remains the question of what you will do with it." The professor looked at Holmes with pleading eyes. "What would you advise?" Holmes's expression softened, though his voice remained firm. "Publish it, but with honesty. Remove the speculative sections and focus only on the verifiable facts. Protecting the truth is far more valuable than preserving one's reputation." As we departed the manor, I turned to Holmes. "You've given him much to consider." "I have," Holmes replied, his voice thoughtful. "Cartwright is a flawed man, but he is not malicious. His greatest crime is his fear, and fear, Watson, is the most human of failings." "And what of the scarred man?" I asked. "He remains at large," Holmes said, his eyes narrowing. "But his role is secondary now. The real battle was always within Cartwright himself, and I believe for once that the professor may yet rise above his fears." Back at Baker Street, Holmes finally allowed himself a moment of rest, sinking into his chair with a sigh. "You were right, Watson," he said, surprising me. "From the beginning, Cartwright's behavior was the key. While I searched for external culprits, you saw the internal struggle. It is a reminder that, as I have often said, you see, but you do not observe. In this case, your observations were invaluable." I smiled, pleased by the rare compliment. "Together, Holmes, we make quite the team." "Indeed, Watson," he said, his eyes closing as a faint smile played on his lips. "And it is a partnership I would not trade for all the manuscripts in England." Chapter 8. The Shack of Shadows. The morning dawned heavy with fog, the grey tendrils of mist curling through the streets like spectres. Holmes's mood matched the weather, sharp, focused, and brimming with purpose. "We must act swiftly, Watson," Holmes declared, as we prepared to depart for Hampstead once more. Upon reaching Hampstead, the quiet elegance of the manor stood in stark contrast to the tension that gripped us. Holmes wasted no time and began his inquiries with the staff, seeking any sign of the scarred man's presence. It was the gardener who provided the crucial clue. "I saw a strange fellow lurking near the woods 2 nights ago," he said, his voice low. "Tall, dark-haired, with a scar on his cheek. He seemed to be heading toward the old shack just beyond the tree line." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "The shack, of course. Come, Watson, we must investigate." The woods surrounding the manor were dense and eerily silent, the thick canopy above muting all sound. Holmes moved with practiced stealth, his keen eyes scanning every shadow for signs of our quarry. The shack soon came into view, a decrepit structure half hidden by overgrown ivy and fallen branches. Holmes motioned for me to stay back as he approached the door, his steps light as a cat's. He pressed his ear against the weathered wood and listened intently. After a moment he turned to me, his voice barely a whisper. "He's inside." With a swift motion, Holmes flung the door open, and we burst into the shack. The scarred man was crouched over a tattered satchel, his head snapping up at our sudden entrance. His eyes widened in recognition, but his shock quickly turned to fury. "You!" he snarled, reaching for a knife on the floor. "Stay where you are!" Holmes commanded, his voice as sharp as steel, but the man bolted, crashing through a side window and disappearing into the woods. "After him, Watson!" Holmes shouted, and we gave chase. The pursuit was frantic, the scarred man darting through the underbrush with the agility of a hunted animal. Branches clawed at my coat, and the damp earth threatened to slip beneath my boots, but I pressed on, determined not to lose sight of him. Holmes, fleet-footed and relentless, led the way, his dark silhouette cutting through the fog like a spectre. As we emerged into a clearing, the scarred man paused to glance back, his eyes wild with desperation. It was his undoing. He stumbled on a gnarled root, giving me just enough time to act. Raising my revolver, I aimed for his legs. The crack of the shot echoed through the woods, and the man cried out in pain as he fell to the ground, clutching his bleeding leg. Holmes was upon him in an instant, disarming him and securing his hands with a length of rope he had carried. "Well done, Watson," Holmes said, his voice steady despite the exertion. "Your aim has saved us both a great deal of trouble." After summoning the authorities, we returned to the shack, where Holmes conducted a brief examination of the scarred man's belongings. Among the items in his satchel, he found a crude map of the manor and a vial containing a clear liquid. "Poison," Holmes muttered grimly. He intended not only to steal but to kill. Cartwright was to be silenced forever. The constables arrived shortly thereafter, and the scarred man, his leg bandaged by my hand, was taken into custody. We followed them to the station, where the man was placed under guard and subjected to Holmes's interrogation. The scarred man, sullen but defeated, finally began to talk under Holmes's relentless questioning. "It was Morley," he admitted. He said the manuscript was worth a fortune, but it was dangerous. The professor knew too much, and someone powerful wanted him gone. "Who?" Holmes pressed. "Who ordered this?" "I don't know," the man growled. "Morley didn't tell me. Just said we'd be paid well to take care of it." Holmes leaned back, his expression cold. "And your plan to poison the professor? Was that Morley's idea too?" The man hesitated before nodding. "Said it was the only way to keep things quiet." As the scarred man was led away, Holmes turned to me, his expression contemplative. "The threads of this case have led us to a web of intrigue, Watson. Morley may have orchestrated the theft and planned the murder, but he is merely a pawn in a larger game. The true culprits remain hidden." "And what of Cartwright?" I asked. "Will he be safe now?" Holmes nodded. "The immediate danger has passed, but he must remain vigilant. The publication of his manuscript will undoubtedly stir controversy, but it may also serve as a shield. Truth, when exposed, can sometimes be the greatest defense." Back at Baker Street, as the fire crackled warmly in the hearth, Holmes poured himself a measure of brandy and raised his glass to me. "Watson," he said, a rare smile gracing his lips, "you have once again proven yourself indispensable. Your steady hand and sharp aim were the turning points of this case." I chuckled. "And your deductions, as always, were the foundation." Holmes's smile deepened. "As I have often said, my dear friend, there is nothing more deceptive than an obvious fact. And yet, without your unwavering companionship, even the most obvious facts would remain hidden." And so, the case of the enigmatic manuscript came to a close, a tale of ambition, betrayal, and the enduring power of partnership. The end. Thank you so much for watching. If you like the story, please subscribe to the channel. Your unwavering support keeps me motivated